I want to thank everybody for being here today. My name is Claire Lewis. I'm the Florida Friendly Community Statewide Coordinator. Today's webinar is New Turfgrass Varieties, and it's brought to you by Dr. Kevin Kenworthy. We'll continue to hold this webinar series the second Tuesday of the month for the rest of the year. Our next webinar is New Pest Updates, and that will be held May 11th at 10 a.m., and it's with Dr. Adam Dale. Your microphones have been muted, so please type your questions into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll take your questions at the end of the webinar. This course has been approved for one CEU through FNGLA, LAIF, DBPR for landscape architects, and the following FDAX categories: limited urban fertilizer, limited commercial landscape maintenance, limited lawn and ornamental, commercial lawn and ornamental and turf pest control. So I'll put a link in the chat box. If you'd like to receive credit for this CEU, please follow that link and submit the $10 administration fee. And then we'll enter your name and license number into the licensing agency. We'll submit the CEUs and email you a course certificate within 7 days after this webinar. And you can check our website to see the webinar schedule and which webinars are approved for which CEUs. I'd like to remind you to fill out the exit survey before you leave today. This gives us valuable information on how we're meeting your educational needs and what educational topics might be of interest to you. And with that, I'd like to turn the screen over to Tom Wickman to introduce today's speaker.
Thanks, Claire. As she said, my name is Tom Wickman. I'm the statewide coordinator for the Green Industries Best Management Practices Program, all part of Florida Friendly Landscaping. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker today. It's Dr. Kevin Kenworthy. Dr. Kenworthy is an assistant professor in the University of Florida Agronomy Department. Dr. Kenworthy focuses on the improvement of turfgrass species used for home lawns, parks, highway right-of-ways, golf courses, and athletic fields. Emphasis is placed on the collection of germplasm with breeding directed towards the development of cultivars that require fewer inputs, but still maintain a high level of quality for acceptance into the turfgrass industry. I know that Dr. Kenworthy works with other universities from across the Southeast and across the nation in search of the perfect turf. And that's certainly something that isn't easy to do, and he works with thousands and thousands of lines of turfgrass. Today's presentation will cover the new landscape cultivars of St. Augustinegrass and an upcoming new zoysiagrass. Without any further delay, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Kevin Kenworthy. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. And thanks, Tom, for that introduction. Thank you, Claire and Emily, for helping to organize everything. And let's see, need to move the box out of my way. I don't know how it looks on your screens, but okay. So today we'll be talking about new turfgrass varieties, and Tom already gave the brief outline that we're going over here. We'll look at some St. Augustine grasses, a new Zoysia grass that will be coming around soon, and then just a little blurb on the Bahiagrass development program. Nothing new, but you can kind of see where we are there. So we'll go ahead and get started with St. Augustine grass. And this table in front of you lists the St. Augustine grasses that have come and gone over the years, and we can mention those that are still around in the industry. So we have bitter blue, which has been around almost 90 years, Floratam almost 50 years, and Floratam, of course, the base of our industry. We have Seville. Raleigh is in the Panhandle, but not really in the peninsula of the state. Classic and Palmetto. These have been the grasses that have been around for most of them quite a while now and have persisted. Others have come and gone in the past decade or so. And now we have these two new cultivars that have entered the market, Pro Vista and Citra Blue. Before we jump into these two new cultivars, we're going to just kind of ponder for a minute about why we tend to lose St. Augustine grass in the state of Florida. And of course, drought is something that will come to everybody's mind. We do have sandy soils that don't hold on to a lot of moisture. And we do have some seasonal drought periods every year in Florida. In Gainesville, that tends to be this time of the year. Generally, at some point in April and through May, we get really, really dry before the rainy season begins in June. But it's really not just drought that we tend to lose grass from or St. Augustine, it's chinch bugs. And when we have drought periods, the chinch bugs tend to be worse. And so what I'm trying to impress upon you is that it's kind of that multi-stress factors, that when two stress factors combine, that's really when we tend to lose our St. Augustine grass. And with that in mind, diseases can also be extremely important in terms of loss of stand of St. Augustine grass, particularly during the rainy season. But what else happens during the rainy season? We get the caterpillar populations begin to explode around the state when we hit the rainy seasons. And what else is going on with the rainy season? It's a lack of sunlight. Okay, so it's really this combination of multiple factors here that tends to result in the loss of St. Augustine grass. If you think about these factors, they're all working against the persistence of St. Augustine grass, be that diseases, caterpillar feeding. And if we don't have much sunlight during the rainy season, then the plants can't photosynthesize, they can't grow, they can't recover from the damage caused by diseases or caterpillars. This particular area right here that you see is brown this is a home that's in my neighborhood in Gainesville. And the area that I circled was sodded twice last year, both times during the rainy season, both times the caterpillar populations took it out. And it's also a very shady area as well. It still looks like this today. I think they gave up. I'm not sure if the homeowners or the installers of the sod understand why this area was lost, but I can tell you that I watched it daily almost, and it was lost due to the caterpillar feeding at this really difficult time of the year during the rainy season. You might think, well, this is the best time of the year to install sod because we have rain and new sod needs water, but it's actually quite a difficult time with the excessive temperatures and then the pest pressure that we have during this period. So, and in fact, this area was lost twice. Okay, so let's get into the look at these two new St. Augustine grasses. We'll have Citra Blue on the left of the line and Provista on the right. Citra Blue was developed through conventional breeding process where we made crosses in the greenhouse between two parents. Those parents are listed here. They don't really need to mean anything other than this was the cross combination that ended up in this cultivar we call Citra Blue. The breeding objectives at the time were improved drought responses, improved disease resistance, and improved shade tolerance. And now if we look at Provista, in the development of Provista, the Scotch company took immature inflorescence of Floratam. So this is key. Provista is very closely related to Floratam, which of course was a smart decision because Floratam is the base of our industry in the state. They took those immature inflorescences and regenerated undifferentiated plant tissue that we call callus. They then took that callus and used a gene gun and inserted two genes into the callus. Okay, so this is the first example of a GMO turfgrass that's on the market, and it is genetically modified Floratam. The two genes, one gene modified the shikimate pathway, which is an amino acid pathway that the herbicide glyphosate affects. And so with that modification, the cells are resistant to glyphosate. And so they are herbicide resistant. And then the second gene inserted affects gibberellic acid. Gibberellic acid is, of course, a hormone that affects cell elongation. And so if you're interfering with gibberellic acid production, then you're going to reduce the elongation of those cells and reduce the growth of the resulting plant that has this stably inherited gene. So once they inserted these genes into the callus, they then put those callus into tissue culture with different hormones so that they can regenerate plants using the process of the different hormones to regenerate roots and then shoots. And the objectives, of course, based on the two genes, were improved weed control and reduced mowing. So before we get into that, we'll talk about some of the other aspects of these two cultivars, look at their drought and irrigation requirements. The first we're going to look at here is Citra Blue. And this data that you're seeing in front of you was accumulated based on a federally funded project that involved these 5 universities. The data you're looking at was from the University of Florida's location near Gainesville at our research farm at Citra. And so what you're looking at, we have Citra Blue, Floratam, and Palmetto compared with one another when irrigated at once a week or irrigated at once a month. This was an experiment that was set up to mimic the different levels of water restrictions that municipalities might impose on homeowners during periods with limited rainfall. So we had treatments that were twice a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, and then at the the most restricted level, no irrigation for a month. So what you're seeing here are the responses between these grasses at once a week and once a month. You'll notice in both charts this severe decline in turf quality. And I should mention the scale here. This is a visual rating of turf quality of 1 to 9, where 9 is a perfect plot, 1 is a dead plot. Anything around 6 would be considered acceptable turf quality. So if you're above that, you're doing really good. And if you're below that, then you're starting to show some signs of stress. And so these dips, I mentioned the different water restrictions that were imposed on the plots. Well, up until this point here, everything was watered really well for establishment. And then at that point where you see the sharp decline, the treatments were imposed. And if you notice the period of the year, this is in that April to May range, and when we don't get much rainfall in the Gainesville area. So in fact, we didn't get rain for at least 30 days this year from the point when the different water restriction patterns were imposed. So on the left, there was no irrigation and no rainfall for a week. And with the graph on the right, there was no irrigation or rainfall for 30 days. So you see the sharper decline with the graph on the right because of the more restrictive irrigation pattern. But you do notice that all of the grasses recovered, and then you can follow their turf quality through the season with the once a week or once a month irrigation. Okay. And note that this is mostly in 2018 and early 2019. This was a fairly rainy period, so we did have a lot of rainfall. So just keep that in mind when looking at the information. But you'll notice that overall, whether you're looking at once a week or once a month, the Citra Blue plots rated higher for turf quality compared to both Floratam and Palmetto. At once a week, Citra Blue and Palmetto were better than Floratam, and at once a month, Floratam and Palmetto were about the same. Citra Blue a little bit better for most of the year. So anyway, we've documented good an ability of Citra Blue to do well with more limited irrigation. Now with Provista, a look at its drought responses compared to some commercial cultivars. If we look at this bullet point here, sod of Provista, Floratam, Seville, and Palmetto were established in September of 2018. And then in June of 2019, they were fertilized, and the dry down or drought scenario was imposed on June 18. So if we look over here at the graph, we're starting at June 20. So this would have been at the period of initiation. And these were rated based on their percent green cover through the dry down. So you can see on the left axis here, 0 to 100% green cover. is the y-axis. And as you progress through this period where water was limited, this trial was performed in a rainout shelter, so there wouldn't have been any rainfall. Even though it's during the rainy season, there wouldn't have been any rainfall on these plots because of the rainout shelter. So the dry down was initiated on June 18, and it was terminated on July 10th. So it went about 3 weeks. And you can notice that somewhere in here, if we look at about somewhere around June 26, June 27, you see that we begin to get some good separation where Provista and Floratam are behaving very similarly and retaining better color, better percent cover, better quality through the remainder of the dry down compared to particularly particularly Palmetto, which declined much more sharply than did Seville. So again, we've quantified that Provista is performing very similar to Floratam for its drought response. And we know based on previous research that Floratam is actually a fairly drought tolerant turfgrass cultivar. It tends to not get the respect that it deserves for its water requirements. Mowing. Of course, with the reduction in gibberellic acid production in Provista, we would expect that we would not have to mow it as frequently. And in fact, it's quite dramatic. It is impressive to look at Provista and know that you haven't mowed it for a certain number of weeks and see that it really doesn't need to be mowed. It is a very impressive characteristic of this cultivar. The data you're looking at was collected at Dr. Unruh's program in Jay, Florida at the West Florida REC. And this was a little bit more than a year, from September of 2018 to November of 2019. So at Dr. Unruh's locations, he gets pretty dormant during the winter, so they wouldn't be mowing through the cooler months of the year. And on average, he needs to mow about 35 weeks out of the year. And so you see that Floratam required mowing during those 35 weeks. It required mowing weekly. How did we determine if a grass need to be mowing? We measured the canopy, the leaf canopy extension. And when the leaf blades extended 1/3 above the mowing height of the grasses, then that triggered a mowing event. So Floratam triggered the mowing event, the need to be mowed 35 times during this 13, 14 month period. And you can see that Provista was required less than half the number of mowings compared to Floratam at 15. Excuse me. And we've also done this research in Gainesville and at Fort Lauderdale, and we saw similar results among all test sites. I apologize. I've had a cold the last several days, so I should have brought some water in here with me. In Citra Blue for mowing, we have similar evidence, but it's more fun to look at pictures, and pictures say 1,000 words, right? What we're showing here are someone standing in Citra Blue and Floratam, Citra Blue on the left and Floratam on the right. And these were areas that were sodded at the same time. And at the time of the picture, the areas were about 2.5 months old. And at the time of the picture, we hadn't mowed for 2.5 to 3 weeks. And you can see on the right with the Floratam that the leaf blades are up around the ankle of the person standing there, and the Citra Blue is basically not even above the shoes. I like to tell people that you walk through Floratam and you walk on Citra Blue. And additional evidence here with this bottom picture at 3 weeks after mowing, and the Citra Blue here is mostly below 5 inches, and Floratam behind here is mostly above 9 inches. So quite a bit difference in the leaf extension rate between Citra Blue and Floratam, and also between Floratam and Provista. Both of these grasses do not need to be mowed as often as Floratam. For herbicides, of course, you've got glyphosate as an option for Provista, and the recommended rates are 2 quarts per acre for annual grassy weeds and 3 quarts per acre for perennial grassy weeds, those that are more difficult to control. This technology is quite amazing for the sod producers. If you've ever been on a sod farm and you've looked at fields of St. Augustine grass, there'll be large areas that have been spot sprayed out that are no longer harvestable, whereas now in a Provista field, the entire field is harvestable. So they have more square foot that's harvestable per acre, which is quite amazing, helps to keep acres down, helps to conserve land that might go into production. It's pretty amazing to see this technology out in the production, but certainly can make weed control easier for the homeowners as well. With CitraBlue, Dr. Unruh has compared CitraBlue with Floratam and Palmetto and compared these different products in terms of the responses of CitraBlue compared back to Floratam and Palmetto. And what he found was that CitraBlue responded similar to Floratam and Palmetto for all products. So whatever you're using on Floratam and Palmetto, you can be fairly confident in the response of CitraBlue will be similar to those 2 cultivars. Diseases. Going back to one of those early slides where diseases in combination with cloudy weather and in combination with caterpillars result in the loss of stand of St. Augustine, I really think that diseases are far more important for loss of stand of St. Augustine grass than drought. Of course, water use and conserving water is extremely important in our state. But diseases and their effects on the grasses are extremely important as well. Here we have Provista and the evaluations of large patch. Large patch, of course, is one of the primary problems affecting St. Augustine grass in the state. And this was data that was visually rated again using that 1 to 9 scale, where 9 would be no damage to large patch and 1 would be a dead plot from large patch. And we have Floratam compared with Palmetto and Provista. Floratam is actually very resistant to large patch. If you have planted Floratam and you're getting a lot of large patch, then I would question whether or not it was actually Floratam that was planted. It may not be Floratam that was actually planted in that location if you're getting a significant large patch. And so the short story here based on the bar graph is that Provista and Palmetto have performed very similarly for their limited amounts of large patch compared to Palmetto, which gets quite a bit more large patch. And notice that scale here towards the latter part of the rating period is down around a visual rating of 5, which would be below an acceptable value. Provista was always above 7. Floratam was between 6 and 7 at its worst point. So Floratam and Provista always stayed above an acceptable level of large patch infection, and Palmetto fell below an acceptable level. For gray leaf spot, we have both summer of 2018 and fall of 2018 ratings. Again, these would have been using a 1 to 9 scale, visually rated. And in the summer of 2018, there weren't any differences between Provista, Floratam, and Seville St. Augustine grass for their gray leaf spot response. But in the fall of 2018, Provista and Floratam both had more severe gray leaf spot than did Seville. Okay. When it comes to take all root rot, there's not any data that's been shared with me, but I've been told that observations of take all root rot and recovery on Provista have been similar to Floratam. Okay, diseases and CitraBlue. In 2018, we took CitraBlue and planted it with Dr. Phil Harmon, our turfgrass pathologist. This is his greenhouse. I call it his disease factory, where he has high levels of take all root rot, and he can also inoculate for large patch. And we planted several plots in here, including CitraBlue and Floratam. And over here on the right are some pictures so that you can see the effects through the course of a year under heavy disease pressure. So again, these were planted in the fall of 2018. Large patch occurred in 2018, 2019, and then following that, there was gray leaf spot and take all root rot. And so these images that you see are about a year after planting. And notice that I'll start at the bottom right here. We have Citra Blue here that has almost a completely covered plot compared to this Floratam, which is about 40% covered. And if we go over to the left, Citra Blue that's almost completely covered, Floratam that's again about 40% covered, and going up, Citra Blue with complete cover and Floratam that's maybe 70% cover. Going to the right, Citra Blue 100% cover and Floratam that's maybe at about 30% cover. So the combination of the diseases through the year with the shade resulting in significant loss of stand of Floratam and essentially no loss of stand in Citra Blue. If we look at a little bit of data, this data was collected by Dr. Harmon. He used what's called a Horsfall-Barrett scale, something commonly used by turfgrass pathologists. And just to give a little bit of perspective, if there's a Horsfall-Barrett rating of 3, then you can look over here and see, well, a Horsfall-Barrett rating of 3 means there was between 3 and 6% disease occurring. And we have Citra Blue compared with Floratam and Palmetto, and we're looking at brown patch, take all root rot, and large patch. Okay, brown patch and large patch are both caused by different strains of Rhizoctonia solani. Brown patch can occur during the summer. It typically occurs on cool season grasses, but you can see it occurring during the warm season or during the warmer parts of the year on warm season grasses. Large patch occurs on warm season grasses during the cooler months. Large patch is the one of the most problematic diseases, again, of St. Augustine grass. So if we look at brown patch, Citra Blue has a higher bar for brown patch and was a little bit more susceptible, but we don't often see brown patch occurring on St. Augustine grass. The two more important diseases are take all root rot and large patch. And we see that with respect to take all root rot, Citra Blue was quite a bit lower than both Floratam and Palmetto. And then if we look at large patch, again, remember Floratam is very resistant to large patch, so we would expect a low bar for Floratam. And in fact, we do, much less than Palmetto. And Citra Blue is comparing favorably to Floratam for its large patch response and has less large patch than Palmetto. So we feel really good about the disease responses based on large patch for both of these grasses, and we have evidence of resistance and take all root rot for Citra Blue. And then for gray leaf spot on Citra Blue, this is some data taken from a national trial that was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And again, we have Citra Blue compared to Palmetto and Floratam. Visual ratings, again, 9 would be no gray leaf spot, 1 would be death of the plot from gray leaf spot. And you see that Citra Blue performed very well for both of these rating dates in 2018 and also for the date in 2019. There was a rating of 9 indicating no gray leaf spot, and then also very high ratings in 2018. Both Palmetto and Floratam for the 2 ratings in 2018 were below acceptable levels, meaning they had high pressure of gray leaf spot. In 2019, Floratam was also below an acceptable value for gray leaf spot. Palmetto was slightly above an acceptable rating. Okay, lethal viral necrosis. This is the new disease that's affecting Floratam St. Augustine grass. We'll have a little bit of education. I'm sure there's lots of folks on call that have been experiencing lethal viral necrosis. Hopefully you're able to attend a few weeks ago our lethal viral necrosis webinar. If not, then I believe there is a recording of it out there somewhere that you may be able to find. But the major points of education are that there is a virus called sugarcane mosaic virus, and it now causes 2 diseases in St. Augustine grass. The first of those is mosaic, and this newer virus is called lethal viral necrosis. And so mosaic occurs on all cultivars of St. Augustine grass. And there's a bullet here that at some point Provista hasn't been tested. I should have updated that. Mosaic does occur on Provista as well. So Mosaic occurs on all cultivars of St. Augustine grass. Mosaic has been around for 50, 60 years. It's not of any economic importance. You may have it and you won't notice it, okay? Unfortunately, in the last several years, the symptoms of Mosaic in Floratam now progress to dead tissue or necrosis and can lead to loss of the lawn in about 3 years. This is now referred to as a new disease called lethal viral necrosis. To date, this LVN has not been identified on any other cultivar of St. Augustine grass. Okay, we've had several reports where somebody has contacted us that they planted palmetto or another cultivar like bitter blue, and it's died of LVN. We have gone back into those landscapes and taken samples of the grass, and in every case, it's actually been Floratam that was replanted in the yard and not bitter blue, not classic, not palmetto, not Seville. And so again, so far, we have not identified LVN to occur on any other cultivar besides Floratam. We also need to point out that LVN is occurring in minimal areas of the state. It is a major problem where it is occurring, but much of the state, it's not occurring. So therefore, Floratam remains a very good option for most of our state. And remember, Floratam is the base of our sod industry, so we can't just abandon it in many of these areas of the state where LVN is not occurring. We've had several sod farms that have voluntarily sent us samples of Floratam to see if they've had presence of sugarcane mosaic virus. And so far, no sod farms have been confirmed as a source of the virus that's causing LVN. Okay, so what about Provista and Citra Blue? Both grasses have been planted in LVN affected landscapes. However, we need more time for assessment. Think of the millions of yards that are planted in Floratam, millions of yards that are planted in palmetto. That gives you good data and information on how these cultivars respond to or are affected by LVN. And now we have these two new cultivars. Provista is ahead of Citra Blue in terms of acreage and lawns planted, way ahead of Citra Blue. So we'll find answers for Citra Blue much sooner than we'll have answers for Provista sooner than we will have answers for Citra Blue. In areas where we have planted Citra Blue, I do know more about those since I do follow Citra Blue since we developed it. It has performed well to date, but we really need more time to be conclusive about its response to lethal viral necrosis. Okay, shade. In 2018, we sodded several cultivars of St. Augustine grass at our research farm in Citra under this oak tree shade. And you can see that we have good penetration of light through the canopy and also low angle light coming in. Excuse me. So again, that was June of 2018, but by September of 2020, this is what it looked like. So at some point last year, the canopy closed in and this became a very difficult environment to maintain sod. So the data you're seeing here is mostly from 2019. I'm sorry for the cough. This is the beauty of doing Zoom meetings. Even when you're under the weather, you can still put them on. So again, the plots were planted in June of 2018. You see that the first ratings were made in August. And you notice that everything has kind of declined here, gone downhill from when we planted. Everything was in really good shape. We're below a value of 6 for everything. So we had tremendous pressure in this shaded environment, and it was a rainy year. So we had tremendous pressure from shade with no sunlight, cloudy weather with no sunlight. And then we had gray leaf spot and caterpillars occurring, reducing the quality. In 2019, we made the decision to treat preventatively for diseases and caterpillars, and you see that we had increases in turf quality. as we went through 2019. And you can compare CitraBlue and Provista to grasses on the market that are considered shade tolerant, those being Palmetto and Seville. And you'll notice that CitraBlue and Seville had the quickest recovery and then maintained quality through the year in 2019. Provista was a little bit slower to recover, but once it did, it also maintained good quality. And for a good portion of the year, CitraBlue, Seville, and Provista had better quality than did Palmetto. So we have good evidence that these two new grasses both do really well in the shade. For chinch bugs, I don't have any information on Provista. Dr. Adam Dell, our turf entomologist, has done some work with CitraBlue. And based on his work in plots, he saw that populations of chinch bugs did not increase quickly in CitraBlue like they did in Floratam or other cultivars. So while CitraBlue is not resistant, he feels that CitraBlue may have some level of tolerance to the southern chinch bug because the populations did not increase rapidly like they did in other grasses. And in the lab, in petri dishes, when the chinch bugs were fed the different grasses, the chinch bugs recycled the grass clippings less readily than they did with the other grasses. So there was less bug poop when the chinch bugs fed on CitraBlue. Okay, so we'll finish up the St. Augustine with some pictures. Here's some landscapes of CitraBlue. This is in the Boynton Beach area. This is in the Lakeland area, a nice shady lawn of CitraBlue. This is again is another landscape in the Boynton Beach area. And just for a range of comparison, this is in South Georgia, a nice backyard of CitraBlue. And this is Provista in the Boynton Beach area, and another Provista lawn in the southern part of the state. Another Provista lawn, and again, another Provista lawn, I believe, in the Boynton Beach, Delray area of the state. So in summary, for these two new grasses, if we have data supporting a good response, it gets 2 check marks. If we've observed a good response, it gets a single check mark. If we've had a poor response, it gets an X or a question mark if we really don't know much. So for both of these grasses, we have good data on turf quality. We know they have good drought responses. They both have very good color. I didn't show that. They both have reduced mowing. Weed control, you've got to give a really strong advantage for Provista because of the glyphosate resistance. They've both done well with large patch. CitraBlue a little better with take-all root rot. CitraBlue better for gray leaf spot. We had that data on brown patch that was negative for CitraBlue, but we don't know anything about Provista. For LVN, we need more time to know how these new cultivars respond to the virus. They both have good shade tolerance. We have some chinch bug data that's somewhat favorable for CitraBlue. And then some of the last comments, both of these grasses seem to be favored by the adult moths that result in then increased caterpillar populations, particularly during the rainy parts of the year. I don't know if it's because they both have a darker green color and therefore the adult moths are attracted to these grasses, but for whatever reason, I strongly recommend that when you plant these grasses, you put out a preventative application of an insecticide to prevent caterpillars because the populations can get pretty excessive quickly. And then for winter color, they both will get dinged by colder temperatures more so than Floratam or Palmetto. And now a comment for CitraBlue. It does have a unique growth habit. It's very horizontal, and so it can tend to, when it gets really mature, kind of grow on top of itself, resulting in thatch. And so you'll want to keep the mowing height low, and you'll want to keep the irrigation minimal. And we are recommending that you probably may need to dethatch CitraBlue once a year or maybe once every 2 years, given the environment. We are trying to initiate some research to look at the combinations of nitrogen fertility, mowing heights, irrigation patterns, and dethatching measures to develop some BMPs for the management of Citra Blue. But shown here is a dethatching instrument, and it's a typical spacing for the blades is on 1.5 inches, and we would recommend that that spacing be at 3 inches for a St. Augustine grass. And we also recommend the mowing height to be between 2 and 3 inches. So this is a change for our industry, particularly where Floritam dominates in South Florida, and you may be mowing at 5 inches. Really do need to mow this grass shorter. And when you mow it shorter, you'll get this wonderful performance out of it. If you mow it tall, then you're going to have problems down the road with thatch accumulation. In the shade, the growth habit changes and you won't have this thatch accumulation. It gets more upright, it thins out a little bit. And it doesn't take much shade. It doesn't have to be direct shade. It could be indirect shade from trees that are 20 foot away or a building that's nearby. Again, it doesn't take significant shade to change the growth habit. Okay, so zoysia grasses. Zoysia grasses have been in Florida for a long time, more than 100 years. And you see here a listing of 21 different cultivars. There are lots of zoysia grass cultivars on the market. Those that are in the white color are actually commercially available in the state of Florida. It's hard to believe that we have that many different zoysia grasses in the state, particularly when it's not used nearly as extensively as St. Augustine grass, but there are many options in the state for zoysia grass. Zoysia grasses tend to be one of 2 species. There are 3 to 4 species shown here. These 3 species, japonicas, the Zoysia mitrellas, and pacificas, are those that have historically been used to produce turf cultivars of zoysia grass. And that has mostly been the Zoysia japonicas used for home lawns and Zoysia mitrellas used for higher value landscapes or in golf courses. We're seeing an increase in use of zoysia grasses for putting greens on golf courses, and those would fall into the superfine pacificas. And there's also another new species that's in use in the state called Zoysia macrantha. I've got that shown here with japonica because of the appearance of a Zoysia macrantha will look very much like a Zoysia japonica. And so with the Zoysia japonicas, we've got these different options in the state. And I should update this. The icon is actually the Zoysia macrantha. Okay, and it is readily available in the state. And you see that Palisades and Icon are underlined because they're the 2 newest options available in the state. Both have now been around for at least 5 years. Palisades may be a little bit longer than that, and they are increasing in acreage around the state. Of course, Empire has been and remains the dominant zoysia grass cultivar in the state. So these points here are true generally for all of these grasses. Large patch is the biggest problem for zoysia grass. The mowing heights here are best if they're less than 2 inches. I would say 1.5 to 2 inches is the best mowing height for these grasses. And so then we can look at the Zoysia mitrellas. And again, there are several different options in the state. Those that are most readily available are Xeon and Zorro. Trinity is a newer variety. It's a little bit smaller of a plant compared to Xeon and Zorro. It's really suitable for use on golf courses. And the mowing heights of these grasses can range from putting green heights up to about 1.5 inches. I wouldn't go much taller than that in a landscape, and they have really good shade tolerance. Typically, none of these are in wide-scale use or production in Florida, although again, Xeon and Zorro are the most readily available in the state. And now we want to introduce this new zoysia grass that was recently commercialized as CitraZoy. And this lets you know where CitraZoy falls in terms of its leaf shape or leaf appearance compared to Xeon, one of the fine textured Zoysia matrellas, and then these coarser cultivars that are on the market, Empire, Palisades, and Icon. So this is actually a really a new product, a new look for lawns in the state of Florida. Something that's a little bit easier to maintain in your landscape than Xeon. In fact, the maintenance is going to be very similar to these grasses over here on the right, but you'll have a little bit more of that refined look like you might get with Xeon. So this could be, CitraZoy could do equally well on a golf course as it could in a home landscape. And there are more home landscapes planted as test sites right now than what we have on golf courses. So I don't want my use of the word golf to scare the landscape industry from considering CitraZoy. It's a good grass for home lawns, has some pretty good, better shade tolerance than some of the other Zoysia grasses on the market as an option. But just wanted to show this so that you see the range in leaf blades and leaf widths for Zoysia grasses on the market and to see where CitraZoy fits in. In the Zoysia grasses, we went through this same process where we looked at the different irrigation frequencies, and I'm only showing the once a month data. And again, we had this sharp decrease in quality when we imposed the irrigation treatments. And you'll notice here that CitraZoy, which is 1307 was its experimental name here, did not recover as quickly as some of the other grasses, but once it did recover, it had very comparable turf quality at once a month irrigation. Now, a comment on CitraZoy and its drought response. I'm sure many of you are well aware that if you had Zoysia grass and St. Augustine grass side by side, they were watered the same, and you turn the water off, Zoysia grass will wilt first, and St. Augustine grass will hold on a little longer before it wilts. Zoysia grass tends to wilt quickly and then go dormant and can persist through that and recover pretty quickly. CitraZoy is a little bit different. It resists wilting longer than the other cultivars, more like a St. Augustine grass, but once it does decline or wilt, it will decline quickly and have a slower recovery, much like a St. Augustine grass. So in one way, you don't have to water as frequently because it's resisting that wilting. But once you recognize and visually see it wilting, that is your cue that you do need to go ahead and water CitraZoy, or it could be damaged and a little bit slower to recover. Large patch, of course, is the most problematic issue on Zoysia grass in our state and really anywhere that Zoysia grass is grown in the US. And so there's a little bit of large patch data here. To help simplify this, there are 3 experimentals that are included in here. And then the last 4 columns of each of these graphs here, this is where you need to focus your observations. Excuse me. So again, we have percent disease severity that's rated over here. So the taller the bar, the more disease. So we want short bars, right? And if you look across here, the 1307, which again is the CitraZoy, has the shortest bar. So let's just focus on the CitraZoy bar, the shortest bar in almost every case, except for 1319 was occasionally a short bar as well. But if we focus on the 1307 bar and look when there are numbers above that bar, that indicates when CitraZoy was performing better than one of these commercial cultivars below. If there's a 1, it was better than Empire. If there was a 2, it was better than Xeon. If there was a 3, it was better than Meyer, which is an old cultivar not used in Florida. So now that that's explained, let's just focus here on Florida. And we see that CitraZoy has a 1 and a 3, meaning that it had statistically less large patch than Empire and Meyer. And you can see that Empire had over 50% large patch disease, and CitraZoy had less than 5% large patch disease. So quite a difference. We've been looking at CitraZoy now for well over 10 years, and I've honestly never seen anything that I would qualify as large patch disease in CitraZoy. That's a fairly profound statement, and I want to work through that in a minute. But before we do that, let's look at this. This is a video down here on the right where we have significant large patch on this experimental 1312 that's growing next to CitraZoy. And these strips were about 10 foot wide and about 100 foot long. And you'll notice as we go through the video, the significant amount of large patch on 1312, and next door, there's essentially no large patch on 1307 or CitraZoy as we go through here. So let me just, I needed to stop the video, talk about that a little bit more. So we've had these small areas of plantings where we've never seen any large patch on CitraZoy for more than 10 years now. And that's a very favorable quality so far, but I'm sure that as we increase acres in sod production, we get more home lawns planted and we get lots of different management scenarios out there, it's very likely that we may get some large patch to occur on CitraZoy. But we feel confident that it won't be at the level that we experience large patch on Empire or the other cultivars of zoysiagrass. We also know that CitraZoy has better winter color performance compared to Empire, Palisades, and Icon. This is a little bit of data, and this has fall dormancy data and turf quality data from the last year compared to, and we see Icon, Palisades, and Empire, CitraZoy here. This graph is sorted from left to right for turf quality. So those on the left will have the best turf quality, those on the right, the worst. And then the second bar is the fall dormancy. And you'll notice that CitraZoy has some of the highest bars for both turf quality and fall dormancy, indicating that it's a very well adapted grass for our state. This is a landscape of CitraZoy that was installed in Gainesville in March of 2018, and this is a June 20 follow-up picture. It's done very well. This was a 2020 installation of CitraZoy in the Boynton Beach area of the state, doing really well. So to finish up with CitraZoy, it has what I call a medium fine texture, has excellent sod strength. The sod growers will enjoy harvesting it. If you're an installer, you'll enjoy installing this grass because it handles so well. Compared to Empire, it has better winter color retention, better shade tolerance, and less incidence of large patch. And so I'm going to finish up real quickly on some Bahiagrass notes. We've been trying to improve Bahiagrass for 10 to 15 years now in the program. And of course, why would we work on Bahiagrass? If we look at this chart, Bahiagrass is the second most in sod production in the state of Florida, second only to St. Augustinegrass, where St. Augustinegrass accounts for 50% of sod production. Bahiagrass accounts for about 30% of sod production in the state. So quite significant and an important species. And of course, it's our low maintenance species. And I found this statement on online one time where someone claimed there's no such thing as a good looking Bahia lawn. I think we could all probably argue against that. We've all seen a pretty good stand of Bahiagrass at one time or another. But we all know that Bahiagrass produces a lot of tall, unsightly seed heads. It doesn't have as dense a canopy, and sometimes the color's not quite so great. So there are things that we can improve from a turf quality standpoint. And so we've worked with Bahiagrass for many years. Bahiagrass actually can be difficult to breed and make crosses with. So we have actually used, we've induced mutations in Bahiagrass. That's one of the ways we've generated variation. And so for many years, we've been going through this process of screening and a lot of different trials. We generated several thousand plants, and then we got those down to about 75. And now in the recent years, we're down somewhere between 6 and 10 lines that we're focused on. In 2019, we planted a couple of trials at golf courses around the state and some of their rough areas. More and more golf courses are planting Bahiagrass in their out of play areas to conserve water. So this is not only important for our landscapes, but also important for golf courses that we develop some better Bahiagrasses for use in the state. So we have some updated pictures here. This was in 2020 from Royal Poinciana. Those plugs had grown in. We had a really nice stand. And then I visited Royal Poinciana. This is down in Naples. I visited this course in March, and they hadn't watered since October. And you see that we have some plots here that are very brown and a few plots that are remaining green and better turf quality. So this has 9 experimental lines and then Argentine as the commercial comparison. And this is Argentine, one of the better performing plots among the 10, but we have 2, this one and this back one here, that were doing much better than Argentine. So a lot of people might look at this and get disappointed that it doesn't look all that great, but I was really excited because we have 2 lines that are outperforming the preferred Bahiagrass commercial cultivar for turf uses, that being Argentine. So we have 2 that are outperforming it. There's 2 stress components going on here. The obvious is the drought stress. The second is pH. Bahiagrass prefers a pH below 6. Generally about 5.5, and the pH at this site's about 7.3. So that's a significant stress on Bahiagrass. And it may be that these 2 lines that are doing better also do better at a higher pH, and this could be significant for use of Bahiagrass in South Florida. So we'll continue with this. We're trying to learn if we can harvest and produce these grasses as sod. They don't produce as many seed heads as Bahiagrass, so the seed production would be less, and they may not be produced by a seed company. So we would have to vegetatively reproduce these as sod and sprigs, just like we do St. Augustine grass and Zoysia grass. And so we're trying to work on that with producers. I'll finish up by saying that for availability of Provista, Citra Blue, or CitraZoy, that you can go to floridaturf.com and look at turf cultivars and find out which growers are where around the state. There's probably 3,000 acres of Provista available in the state, and there are about 500 acres of Citra Blue that have been planted across the state, and about half of that is commercially available at the time. CitraZoy, again, was just recently commercialized. There's essentially nothing that's commercially available right now. There are just a few growers that have taken it on. JW Sod near Okeechobee would be the one grower that might have some that's available. Most of it around the state will be in some level of expansion and probably won't have much availability for another year, maybe a year and a half. But again, JW Sod near Okeechobee might have a little bit that's commercially available. And with that, that's all I have. So I'll take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was excellent. I've got quite a few questions that
I'm sorry for my sniffling and coughing. But
not a problem. I appreciate you powering through, actually. So I'll start from some of the earliest questions that came in. Is Provista tolerant of glufosinate ammonium?
It is not. Glufosinate is, while both glufosinate and glyphosate are similar in that they're both amino acid inhibitors, they do affect different pathways. So Provista is not resistant to glufosinate. And that's a great question, actually, because you might ask yourself, well, if it's resistant to glyphosate, how am I going to control or remove it if I want to change? And so there are herbicides that you can use, like glufosinate, to kill Provista.
Yeah, that's a very important point that would be a concern for some people. So you have to have some sort of check on it, I guess.
Yeah, you got to be able to keep it out of your flower beds, right? Other than just manually pulling it.
What about cold damage from heavy frost or freeze during the winter on Floratam?
On Floratam. So Floratam, it can be susceptible to winter kill, and we had some winter kill on Floratam in the Gainesville area this year. We had the most severe winter that I'd say that I think we've had in maybe 5 or 6 years in the Gainesville area, and there was definitely some winter kill around town that I noticed. I've been in Jacksonville and noticed some winter kill in that area as well. The one comment, both Citra Blue and Provista will lose color to cooler temperatures more so than Floratam or Palmetto. I've seen sod fields in the Belle Glade area that were affected by, I think, those latter cold spells that came at the end of January, early February, and they set back the Citra Blue and Provista fields, and Floratam wasn't even touched by those. Now that was down in South Florida. So that would make, when a grass doesn't go dormant, it's going to be more susceptible to direct winter kill. So that's why Floratam is not used very far north. It's really not used outside of the state of Florida. And we're going to see Citra Blue and Provista make it into South Georgia. They can go a little bit more dormant, but that loss of color is kind of a negative through most of Florida.
Okay, fantastic. With Provista's slow growth, how does it recover from damage?
So far, I've not heard, the biggest, I guess the biggest observation of that would be sod growers growing it in from when they have sprigged a field or plugged a field. And I've not heard mention of a sod grower who's had any issues with growing in Provista. So it grows in as sod quick enough, and I think comparable to Floratam. So the biggest reduction in growth is actually the leaf extension rate, the upright growth of it. And it's not necessarily the vertical extension, or the horizontal extension of the stolons. But that, I think, is a legitimate question. If a lawn gets damaged, will it be slower to grow in? But I don't have any data on that, and I don't have any observational comments or feedback that's been given to me on that either.
Okay. How does Citra Blue and Provista fare against SCMV?
So SCMV is sugarcane mosaic virus. So we covered that with the slide on sugarcane mosaic virus. Again, that is the virus that causes mosaic, that affects all St. Augustine grass cultivars, but it's not an important disease. SCMV now causes the really severe disease, lethal viral necrosis, on Floratam. And again, we need more time to assess whether Citra Blue and Provista are affected by LVN.
Right.
It's a little early to know still.
All right. Your trials were in mid-state Gainesville area. Does your data extend to the South Florida area as well?
So I didn't show the turf quality slides, but we've tested Citra Blue all around the state. Citra Blue's been tested at 5 or 6 locations around the state. That would include in Arcadia, Florida, in Lake Placid, in the Belle Glade area, in Melbourne. It's been in trials at some of these locations since 2012, and then it's now been on sod farms around the state since probably 2016. And then we formally released in 2017 and commercialized in 2018. So it's been around throughout the state for quite a lot. And of course, Provista has been, the Scott's company has tested it around the state with growers as well.
Okay. What areas of the state are currently affected by LVN?
The most problematic area is Palm Beach County, and then going south into Miami. And then we're starting to see it increase. On the West Coast, it was initially only in Pinellas County. but it is beginning to occur in the Naples area, I guess Collier County as well. So it's mostly in South Florida where this is occurring. It's not been found any further north than Pinellas County, that being the West Coast. And I believe I've heard that it's been identified as far north as Vero Beach on the East Coast. So for whatever reason, it's not moved further north. And you only see the symptoms during the cooler months of the year when the grass is not growing as well. When warmer temperatures return, it tends to grow out of the symptoms. Now, the following year, the symptoms progress and spread further into the lawn and kill more of the lawn. So it is a progression over time because the grass is able to grow out of the symptoms. The virus is still going to be in the plant, but the symptoms aren't noticeable because the plant can somewhat outcompete it during the warmer weather.
Okay. Any idea on the price difference between Floratam, Citra Blue, and Provista?
Well, these two new grasses will generally be more expensive compared to Floratam. And I would say, I can't speak for Provista, but Citra Blue tends to be about 2 cents more per square foot, depending on the grower. If they're, say, charging 23 cents a square foot for Floratam, they might charge 25 cents a square foot for Citra Blue. But I've heard of both higher prices and cheaper prices for Citra Blue. We do have a grower, Star Farms, in the Belglade area, who's got quite a bit of Citra Blue available and is looking to move that product. So I expect that his price might be a little bit cheaper. He's got some fields that are getting a little bit older in age, and we do need to move that and get it out in the landscapes.
All right. This next one is kind of a comment, and maybe you'll comment on that. They're starting to see restrictions on the use of glyphosate products in Miami-Dade County. How might that affect the use of Provista turf?
It shouldn't affect it at all because you can still use the other herbicides that you've always used on St. Augustine grass. Just because it's resistant to glyphosate obviously doesn't mean that you have to use glyphosate.
Okay, great answer.
It's just an added tool.
Yeah, a really good added tool actually especially for the homeowner to be able to do something easily too.
Yes.
Would you recommend Citra Blue or Provista for best performance in Palm Beach County?
Oh boy, that puts me on the hot seat. I'm in a position where even though I developed Citra Blue, that I prefer to be in a position where I don't promote one thing over the other, but I advocate and try to provide the merits for these grasses and let people make their decisions. They both, I think they're both good new options for our state. If you're worried about LVN, then try to find out. These grasses have both been planted in the area down there. Contact some of the county agents and see where they might know where these two grasses have been established and if they're having any issues with LVN. They both have good shade tolerance. In terms of density, I would say Citra Blue is naturally more weed competitive because of its density, but they're both attractive. They both produce good turf quality. You saw the disease data for both. I might give Citra Blue a slight edge on the disease resistance. They're pretty similar on their shade tolerance. Okay. I know that's a politician's answer, but that's
I think you handled it well. There doesn't seem to be any information on CitraZoy on floridaturf.com. Do you know of any farms that might have that available?
Right. It's probably so new that it wouldn't be worth farms listing it. There are about 5 farms that have gotten sprigs and have planted it, so it wouldn't be ready. The only farm, again, that would have some because they're serving as the supply source for the other farms, and that would be J.W. Sod near Okeechobee. And they probably don't have it listed on their website either. You would just need to contact them and see if they have some available. And I recently heard that they're very willing to sell some based on what they have available and their own expansion needs, and what looks like the expansion needs throughout the state so far, I believe, have been met. So I do believe that they are willing to sell some. They do not have a large volume. We're talking about less than 10 acres available. So we're not going to see widespread use of it, but very limited amounts that they might have available.
Okay. If you could pick a time of the year that would be the best time to resod lawn, when would that be?
Again, my perspective is based on the Gainesville area, and that's so much different than the weather in South Florida. I really like the springtime. So we don't have a lot of disease pressure. It's our drier time of the year, and you can manage the establishment with irrigation, and you don't have the excessive disease pressure. The fall is also another good time. It's not as hot and humid, and again, you have less disease pressure. I would say the key to that is based on your area of the state. Avoid those periods of the year when you have the heaviest disease pressure, because that's really what comes in and hurts these new grasses when they're trying to establish. We can always manage the water, even where you may have water restrictions. There are generally allowances for the establishment of new grasses, and you want to give that grass the best environment possible for getting well established. And then once it's well established, then you can benefit from the reduced irrigation needs of these new grasses.
All right. How does Citra Blue perform in an oceanfront environment?
We actually do have some salt tolerance data that was collected from a collaborator in Georgia, and it does have fairly decent salt tolerance. I've not seen it get direct ocean spray on it, so I can't really comment, but in salinity evaluation, Citra Blue has been favorable as a St. Augustine grass.
Okay. Any progress on the development of buffalo grass anywhere in Florida?
You will never see buffalo grass used in the state of Florida. It's not adapted at all. Buffalo grass is a native grass, and I did my master's research on buffalo grass. I love buffalo grass. It's a great grass. But buffalo grass needs a heavy soil and a drier environment to do well. We're too rainy, we're too humid, we have too much disease pressure, and our sandy soils, buffalo grass just absolutely will not do well. It won't compete against Bermuda grass that might invade. It won't compete against Bahiagrass that might invade. If someone tries to sell buffalo grass in this state, then they're doing you a disservice.
All right. Can anyone buy Provista?
Anyone can buy Provista, yes.
Okay.
It's readily available around the state.
Let's see. If I have a less desirable zoysia, like Xeno, would replacing with CitraZoy require removing the Xeno?
Yes, I believe so. You could always get some sod and cut it into plugs and plug it in and then just let them co-mingle, but it would never completely dominate something that's already there. They would just co-mingle, I believe. And Zoysia grass can be difficult to remove because it has a rhizome system, and that rhizome system can go pretty deep into the soil, actually.
All right. Does Provista or Citra Blue tolerate occasional flooding conditions, more so than other varieties?
I wouldn't say more so than others, but yes, they will tolerate occasional flooding.
All right. What fertilizers do you recommend for zoysia?
Well, it's not a specific fertilizer. We base fertilizer recommendations on amounts of nitrogen through the year, and generally we refer to that in pounds per 1,000 square feet. And that may vary depending on your location in the state. And so, Tom, I don't know if you have access to any EDIS publications that you could put in the chat box, possibly, or Claire. But there would be EDIS publications for fertilization that would be your guidelines throughout the state for zoysiagrass and St. Augustinegrass. Zoysiagrass, we will recommend fewer pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. I like to be around a pound to 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet through the year. You might go up to 3 pounds in South Florida, but you want to put out lower amounts with zoysiagrass. You don't want to push nitrogen. If you push nitrogen, don't push color in zoysiagrass. That will get you into trouble. If you see a reduction in growth, then you might want to apply something like a 0.5 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And you can do that 3 to 6 times through the year for a total of 1.5 to 3 pounds of nitrogen, depending on your location. So you don't want to ever don't push color in zoysia. You'll wind up with a thatchy mess that the bill bugs get into and large patch gets into. So you want to keep your nitrogen low on zoysia grass and keep your mowing heights low, and you'll have a great product.
All right. I think we're almost done. Can Xeon be maintained long-term without dethatching?
That's going to depend on the level of sun or shade. In the shade, I think over time you will want to dethatch a zoysia, or excuse me, in the sun over time you will want to dethatch a zoysia grass. In the shade, growth habits change. They get a little bit more upright and thinner, and you don't get quite as dense or the thatch production. So that would, in full sun, you're going to want to employ a dethatching process periodically in zoysia grass. And that then also depends on how much water and the mowing height and the nitrogen levels that you're using as well. If you keep it lean and mean and there's a little bit of traffic, you might not ever have to use a dethatching. But if you're on the upper scales of the nitrogen range and you water a little bit more frequently, it's going to get thatchy in the full sun for sure.
All right. And for, somebody looking for a directory of all the sod farms in the state, that would be floridaturf.com would be. That
is the best directory available. There are many, and so floridaturf.com is the Turfgrass Producers of Florida website, which is the grower association in our state. And not every grower is a member of Turfgrass Producers of Florida, but this is the one site where you can find a list of growers. Again, it's not conclusive, only those that are members of TPF.
All right, and here's an interesting question, and maybe I'm not sure whether you're doing research on this. For disease resistance, can you do a combination lawn of Provista, Citra Blue, and Floritam together? Multi-species, basic, or multi-cultivar lawn.
I'm not sure that would help you in terms of disease resistance too much. It might help you for some of your insect populations. There is some evidence of that. Dr. Adam Dale, our entomologist, is doing a little bit of work on using multiple cultivars in landscapes. Now, Provista and Citra Blue, I do believe, would blend fairly well with one another. They won't blend very well with Floritam because Floritam has a lighter green color and Floritam has a much more rapid rate of growth. So you would see where the Floritam patches are in your yard, you'll see the elongation of the leaf blades and the need to mow much sooner than you would see with Citra Blue or Provista. So once it's mowed, it'll look very nice and uniform, but you'll have those those periods where you'd lack some uniformity. So it all depends on your desired level of aesthetic value in your own landscape, depending on, for some homeowners, it doesn't matter. For others, it really matters. So, I mean, you could do it, but you've got to understand the differences in those grasses and the resulting look that it would ultimately provide.
Well, fantastic. Kevin, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. I feel like I learned a lot. You covered a tremendous amount of material during that hour. And then thank you for spending another 20 minutes going over the list of questions that came through. I'll just reiterate what one of the chat box item says. It says, great program. I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you very much for taking this time. Just a reminder to all those folks listening that this presentation is recorded and it will be placed on the Florida Friendly Landscaping website. And that was placed in the chat box, so you can look through that as well, so that you can locate that location. Thank you very much, Dr. Kenworthy. Again, thank you for all your expertise and help today.
Oh, thank you everybody for attending. It's my pleasure.
Everybody have a great month.